The gospel reading for this morning is from Luke's gospel, a very story to which Deb alluded in her children's message. Listen for these words from God, and I am reading from the Message translation. Someone out of the crowd said, "Teacher, order my brother to give me my share, a fair share of the family inheritance." Jesus replied, "Mister, what makes you think it's any of my business to be a judge or mediator for you?" Speaking to the people, he went on, "Take care, protect yourself against the least bit of greed. Life is not defined by what you have, even when you have a lot." Then Jesus told them this story. The farm of a certain man produced a terrific crop. He talked to himself, "What can I do? My barn isn't big enough for this harvest." Then he said, "Here's what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones. Then I'll gather in all my grain and goods, and I'll say to myself, 'Self, you have done well. You've got it made and can now retire. Take it easy and have the time of your life.' Just then God showed up and said, 'Fool, tonight you die, and all your barn full of goods. Who gets it?' That's what happens when you fill your barn with self and not with God." God is still speaking. Thanks be to God. Before I start the message, I just want to remind those of you who may not have noticed, it is Pride Week in Harrisburg this week. Hence, this wonderful stole, which John told me I could borrow anytime I wanted to, and the altar adornment. We had a great day yesterday, in spite of the rain, which soaked a lot of things, and us as well. And I also have to say, it's so good to be here. And I have to confess that when I sent Terry the liturgy and the prayers and the message title for the worship bulletin, I had no idea how I would be dealing with the lectionary texts for this week. And spending every night in front of the television watching the DNC did nothing to relieve my confusion about how to make simple life application to these texts. The letter writer is telling the Colossian church not to turn the things that give them pleasure into gods. And Jesus is pointing out to the young man who came to him for a judgment that he is foolish to think that his possessions are more important than his relationships with other people and with God. Pray with me, please. Gracious, patient, and loving God, please help us to keep our stuff and the things we treasure in proper perspective, and allow us to treasure our relationships with all of your creation, with each other, and especially our relationship with you. Please let the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be not only acceptable, but pleasing in your sight, O God, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. I don't know about you, but it seems to me today that people are driven by their pursuit of pleasure, their constitutional right to the pursuit of happiness. I guess the distinction among people is what constitutes pleasure? What constitutes happiness for them? Unfortunately, for too many of us, happiness is all about stuff and things. Pursuit of happiness in things can cause people to become greedy. Now, this is nothing new. there was that anxious fellow in the crowd around Jesus about 2,000 years ago. He was consumed by the worry that he was not getting his fair share of what was in his Father's will. How many biblical stories do we see people struggling over their inheritance? Jacob tricked his father to get Esau's portion. The prodigal son insisted that his father give him his inheritance even before his father died, so he could pursue his own ideas of happiness. Joseph's brothers were afraid of the favor which he had with his father and how it might affect their own inheritances. And in our world today, how many families have been ripped apart in battles over who inherited what? At any rate, this biblical fellow is worried about his life, his security. He's clearly afraid for his future, as if it's all up to him. And after the past few weeks, and actually months, have loud voices not attempted to make us fearful? Fearful of people of other faiths, of different skin color, of last names that we have trouble pronouncing, of different gender identities and sexual orientations, of each other, and for sure, of our futures. And if we are truly aware of what's going on, we have to take a good look at ourselves and admit that even when there may be things we don't understand, and there may be things of which we think we should be fearful, I don't like it. I hope you don't like it. I hope we don't like that we become fearful. When we allow ourselves to succumb to fear about the future, as if it were all up to us. And sometimes in the fear and despair, we do cry out. We cry out just as the young man did. We cry out for justice. The worried guy with the big silos asked for what he thought was justice. Justice that would benefit only him. He waited for the answer. And we wait. Sometimes we feel like we're waiting for an eternity. We all look at Jesus' face, and then we slowly get the sinking feeling that Jesus just really isn't very interested. These security issues, such as fair inheritance, where our future will be, what our future will be, issues that can be very upsetting to us, just don't mean a hill of beans to Jesus. Now, don't you go sitting there and misinterpreting what I just said. Jesus does care about us. Jesus does care about what happens to us and to our world. Why else do you think he came to live here, to love us, and to set an example for us? I just don't think who inherits the lion's share of the family stuff is all that important to Jesus. Neither, apparently, were things like that important to the Apostle Paul. He spent a lot of time and energy trying to steer the Colossian congregation away from their old behavior. He reminds them and us that we are new creatures, and uses the telling phrase, greed, which is idolatry. Greed is a way of worshiping wrong gods. Those objects of worship can, in fact, turn into self-destructive behavior. Now, I am of the strong opinion, and I know that will not surprise any of you, that I have strong opinions, But I am of the strong opinion that there are other things besides material possessions that take up way too much room in our lives. Things that we are reluctant to let go of. Things that engender our worshipful behavior. The behavior that I've witnessed lately and some of the emotions and responses that I personally have exhibited are just as destructive as our worshipful attachment to our stuff. We've seen abundant evidence of that, especially recently. People who pay allegiance to the gods of ultimate power, of money, of fame, of possessions, who worship the gods of racism and white supremacy, the gods of violence and death, the gods of their brand of religion. And worship of those wrong gods has the power to destroy families, careers, friends, people we don't even know, and sometimes even our very own lives. So what do? What are we to worship? What should hold the center of our focus? When Paul wrote to Colossians, he admonished them, if you were raised with Christ, look for things that are above. He wanted them to concentrate on higher values rather than the values of the world. He wanted them to set aside things like anger, rage, malice, slander, abusive language. Get rid of your old worldly nature and put on the new nature. We are called to conform ourselves to the image of the Christ. Yeah, I know. Sounds really good, doesn't it? Doesn't it? Uh-huh. But I'm here to tell you, it is not easy. Now, if we were at the convention, you all would be parroting that back to me. That is not easy. But if we do that, or perhaps I should say, when we try to live that way, how will that affect our lives? It means that we have to see people and situations through the eyes of the Christ. It means that in our world, I'm thinking, we would see neither Christian, nor Jew, nor Muslim. There would be neither black, brown, nor white. There would be neither homosexual, transgender, or heterosexual, neither able nor disabled. And we would accept our call to work together to see to it that there is no poverty, no undereducated, no underemployed, no unemployed, no outcast, no marginalized. There would be no other. One of my clergy colleagues told me about her brother's recent attempt at simplifying. That is, getting rid of too much stuff. He said that he and his wife had decided to ask themselves 2 questions to help them decide to keep something. First question, do we really need this? Second question, really? Good questions for the man in Jesus' story and for us as well. Those same questions could be adapted to our lives as we seek to put to death the parts of our lives that belong to this world. 1, does this kind of thinking and behavior really work for the good of all God's creation? Does it make me feel good about myself? Really. Luke's story and Paul's letter sound like they're railing against wealth and possessions and what we choose to spend our money and ourselves on. In point of fact, they have little to do with how we spend our money and far more to do with what we choose to spend ourselves on. They have to do with our basic attitude toward God and neighbor. And Jesus points us to the fact that when we are possessed by our wealth, we miss being rich in our relationship with God. Paul tells us that when we hang on to the things that are not good for us, when we behave in ways that do not promote the common good, we miss being in right relationship with our neighbors and ultimately with God. When we seek security elsewhere, we cannot find the deeper joy that comes from knowing we are secure in God's love. Everything we have is a gift from God to us. Our families, our intellect, our talents for art, music, drama, cooking, sewing, organizing, writing, learning, our careers, our wealth, our material possessions, our power, even our bodies, regardless of what we may think of them, are gifts to us from God. But you see, beloved of God though we may be, none of those blessings comes to us because of who we are. They come to us because of who God is. We are blessed to be a blessing. And when God blesses you and me, she doesn't have only us in mind. She's not blessing us for our own sake. These teachings are urgent for us and the society in which we live. They not only warn against self-destructive behavior, but remind us of the new self we have because we have been baptized into Christ. And when we are baptized into Christ, we die to our old nature and put on new life in the Christ. A life that centers not on self, but on compassion, kindness, humility, meekness, patience, and forgiveness. And our call, I think, to paraphrase the Reverend William Barber, is that we must shock the world with the power of love. We must shock this world with the power of mercy. We must fight for justice for all. Putting on the new self and following the image of the Christ is indeed the genuine alternative to bigger silos and bigger closets.